was another mortgage or something on there.
Yeah, whenever you're ready. Okay, great.
No, it was on those addresses.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the City Council study session. Tonight we have two agenda items. Our first is review and selection of Citizen of the Year nominations. Our communications manager, Allison Carney, is present to discuss the nominations forms. Staff is looking for consensus on the selection of the 2017 Citizen of the Year and direction to move forward with planning for the celebration in May. Good evening.
Good evening. So you have the 3 nomination forms in your packet, and I also put back in the guidelines that you had agreed on earlier in the year for selection. So if you can decide that in one night, then we'll be happy. The event would be in May, so that's why we need about a month to plan it.
Excellent. Thank you. At this point, I'd entertain some discussion regarding the nominations. A little disappointing to only get 3, but hopefully we have one that we can come to some consensus on. Anybody want to kick us off? Go ahead, Lorette.
There was a little bit of concern. I read the instructions. Well, actually, I heard from some citizens, and they were a little concerned about the signing off on it thing. So after
What was
the
signing off thing?
instructions to nominate somebody,
What about them?
only one of the 3 followed the instructions. Some people said that when they went on there to nominate somebody, they felt that that was kind of onerous. They kind of didn't want to have to go to the person and get them to sign a release and do all of that stuff. Seemed kind of a little weird. Fortunately, the 2 people that talked to me that had a problem with the instructions, the person's already nominated. So it was somebody that was being nominated anyway, so it's not like that person didn't get to be nominated. But if we just look at some of the criteria in the future, and unfortunately, of the 3, only one ended up following the instructions. So,
Thank you for that. We can discuss the process as well a little bit if you'd like. But my thought is we can come to some consensus on whether or not we want to move forward this year, and then we can alternate or we can change that process a little bit as we see based on feedback
I like doing
for next
it
year.
with the citizen. I think it came out good.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Russell.
I actually think it came out well too, and I think we should move ahead because I think that there was a very concerted effort for one person, and maybe as we get going, that would, it's a good example of how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed, thank you. Others on the process or on a particular nominee that they would like to advocate for? Councilmember Martinez.
I actually liked opening it up to the citizens. I think that was really nice. Hopefully next year maybe we can get more applications, but I think it was really nice, and I really enjoyed reading all of the applications, and it was really cool to see what some of our citizens are doing, maybe that I didn't know about. I think that was really neat. And there were a lot of letters and recommendations in support of Doug Cohn, so I think I would like to move forward with that candidate.
Thank you. Others want to weigh in? Mayor Pro Tem?
I do appreciate the process, and if we had to make the nomination by who followed the rules, I'm going to second Amy's nomination, not only because he followed the rules, because I think he's been an outstanding citizen of our city and has done amazing things and still continues to do so. So I will like to, we don't vote, but I would like to say, yes, I also agree.
Thank you. Others want to weigh in on that?
I'm in supporting Doug's nomination.
Excellent.
I just have one more question. In years past, with that, the candidate having to approve that they're okay with their nomination, has that usually happened during the nomination process, or does that happen afterwards? Because I wasn't sure on that, and it seemed like maybe it would be okay if it happened after the fact.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's fine if it happens after the fact. I don't think it's ever happened in years past. And they ran, before my time, I have heard stories that there was an issue.
Okay.
So we implemented that, and as we were posting it, the forms and creating the fillable forms online, we realized whether they sign that form now or if they're selected and then they sign it, that probably doesn't change much, but the fact that it's out there and they need to sign it at some point, that's the important part.
Okay. Thank you.
And maybe, we could also think about do we want them to give consent to be nominated? I think in the past it had just always been a pretty informal process, and, there was conversations and that type of thing that happened, and, hey, I talked to him, and, he's good with it, kind of thing. So, I think it's a good idea to probably formalize that a little bit more, but at the same time, we don't want to run off anybody. So, yeah, Mayor Pro Tem.
Just a reminder why we're here at this process. Number one, we felt we needed one because of a situation that came up on someone who was nominated before. Wanted to make sure that if you're agreed that if something comes up in your background, that you're going to be okay. That, there's no weird surprises that would make you feel a little awkward. So,
But we already know something's weird.
we already know Doug's a little off. But that's why we love him anyway. But so I appreciate that they, in writing, say, yes, I'd like to go through the process. So thank you.
Thank you. Rita?
I think also maybe in the way it's written in the process is perhaps have the person that's going to nominate them ask them if they would mind being nominated, and then that person also could get them to sign that. I don't remember exactly how it was written in the, because if I was going to nominate somebody, I probably would ask them first. So.
Yeah, because then they're part of the public list. They're, discussed in a public meeting, and, gosh forbid these become super contentious in the future. I wouldn't want somebody to feel like we drug their name through the mud or something and gave it to somebody else or something of that nature. So
right.
I'm almost advocating for a prior, like you said, when you're checking in with that person to say, hey, should I nominate you? Maybe that's a good time to collect the signature if we feel like we need a signature. But at minimum, somebody should be checking with them to make sure they're aware, at least, that they're being nominated. In my mind, I think that would be helpful. Lorette, did you want to weigh in on that? Sorry.
I would like to make it part of the process in the future that we make an agreement that no matter what happens, we don't drag anybody's name through the mud publicly because they were nominated for Citizen of the Year, and somebody might disagree with it. So maybe if we could put people at ease that they're not up
Thank you for that. And for the record, I agree. I haven't seen that happen yet. I'm just speculating that, if these things become a little more contentious with a lot of folks really advocating for one person or another, that it could become that way. So I appreciate that. Goal is never to run any of our citizens through the mud. And it may be unanimous. I'm also in support of Doug Cohn. I really appreciate his efforts with the Historic Preservation Society, just to name one of many things that Doug's done. Needless to say, he's a regular visitor to our council meetings, enjoys our stories, and really highlights, I think, what is really unique about our community, and that is our unique history. So I really appreciate his efforts. So I think that's everybody. I think we have consensus. Do we want to talk a little bit more about the event itself? Do you need feedback on that, Allison? Yep, please.
Do we vote on it in there tonight, or what are we doing?
I don't know that this is this
No.
going to come
Never
forward in a
been
vote?
voted on.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever really
We were
voted
just
on
looking
this.
for consensus here tonight. So we would have it at the Malley Center, like in years past. Is it May 3rd, no, or May 11th? May 13th?
Forgetting Eric's birthday already.
14th, 15th,
May 13th at what time?
I
council
don't
meeting.
know.
Tuesday at council
Oh, is it?
Oh, that's right. In lieu of our council meeting,
Okay,
so 6
6
p.m.
o'clock.
May 13th?
Is that a Monday?
That's a Saturday. Yeah. At 6 p.m. Is that what we're thinking?
May 5th, so it's
So it'd be the 15th.
May
15th.
15th.
May 15th.
So we'd have it the 15th.
Okay. So May 15th at 6 p.m. at the Malley Center? Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So we'll just start the planning if,
ooh, I don't know.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
You know, I would.
That's
I,
the second Monday.
I will say that. Is it a second Monday?
Hold on.
Looks like a third Monday.
It's the third Monday, which is our council meeting. We can't.
So we'd either have to do the
So we might need
8th
to
or
look
the
at that.
22nd.
8th or the 22nd.
Anybody have any preference there?
8th is fine for me.
Doug, you got any preference? He can make it on both dates, it seems, so he didn't jump up and down, so it sounds like he can make both dates. I'll leave that decision to staff based on scheduling. We'll take a look at the scheduling, but one of those two dates. I would also suggest that we do vote on this, that we bring forward at least a proclamation and vote on that.
Not been a process, but I'd love to add it.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice for the Citizen of the Year to take home a proclamation.
I
That,
actually think it's been voted on before, but just
yeah, so
take a look
regardless,
at how
just for a
it's
little
done.
clarity there, I feel like it'd be
Sometimes
nice to get a
things change from
proclamation
council
that
to council,
proclaimed Mr. Doug Cohn as the Citizen of the Year
Okay.
and invited folks to his celebration.
Okay, your next regular
Yes, ma'am.
agenda? Okay.
Yep.
You know, I struggled with it because his wife's the one that really should get the award.
Something tells me he might share a little of the glory that night, so I don't think we have to worry too much about that, but obviously agreed. Linda's been a long-term community member as well. Further comments about the event itself, about, one of the things I did hear about was the traveling trophy. I think that there was some sort of something that was given to recognize the Citizen of the Year, or a plaque that hasn't been updated or something of that nature. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank as to what it was, but I remember thinking that there was something we needed to look or
we
think
were
about.
going to do that.
And we just didn't? Is that what happened?
Kind of had a few
A
years.
hiatus, yeah. Okay, I'll try to refresh my memory on
we
that.
made a plaque this past year of everybody who has won throughout every year.
Okay.
And it's hanging in the Malley.
Okay, excellent. And so we'll be able to add Doug's name to that. And, okay, so maybe that's what I was thinking, and maybe we finally got that done this last year, and I was thinking we didn't do it in the past, so I appreciate you guys taking care of that. Other questions or comments regarding the Citizen of the Year before we move on to agenda item 2? Moving us along, that is the police building status update. Public Works Director Dave Henderson will give council an update on the Inglewood Police Headquarters Building Replacement Project. Good evening, Director Henderson.
Kathy's going to join us here. It takes her just a minute to get here.
Please.
You move pretty quick.
A little better every day.
Well, Kathy will start us off.
Okay, great. Director Wrinkle, welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the financing and the design and construction. I don't have too much to update you on the financing. You want me to speak into this mic a little? Thank you. It's the hand signals. They're the best. That we have a little bit of an update is basically we're following the construction schedule. There was a rate hike of 0.25% on the short-term rates for March. And we're expecting probably another one in June. So we're hoping to get our financing done before then. But the market is pretty well expecting that, so the rates are fairly level and should stay that way. So we'll follow the construction schedule whenever they have the estimate for us to bring to you to decide on how much you'd like us to go out and purchase.
Thank you.
So, any questions?
I have a question that kind of came up during our NLC trip, was that I got an opportunity, I believe it was North Glen, to chat with some elected officials in North Glen. They were about to do a groundbreaking for their new police station, which is astoundingly similar to ours. Their population is very similar to ours. Their square footage is very similar. Their number of uniformed officers is very similar. But their price tag's a little bit different, and they downsized a little bit. So maybe we'll get there, but I just think that they would be an excellent resource, and I just wonder if we've reached out and whether we've had some communication with them.
No, I haven't. We have talked with the architect who started on the project, but that was early when he was starting on that. So
The council members, the elected officials there in Thornton suggested to me that they were able, in their minds, to really reel in the project a little bit and get really superior value. That some of the when I threw out the numbers and the square footage, they said, oh, that's where we started, and so where we ended up. So having them kind of have gone through that process recently, just think might be helpful as far as touching base with them and making sure we're understanding what types of challenges and opportunities they saw through this process. I know we've got our own crew, and it sounded like they were kind of managing the project a little more internally than we are, but doesn't mean there might not be some best practices there to obtain. Other thoughts or comments regarding the police project?
Well, I'll go forward with a little bit about the design and construction. First, we will reach out to North Glen and make sure that we're getting the best value for Inglewood that we can get. Our project management company, CBRE, they've been really busy since we updated you about 6 weeks ago. So I'll hit the highlights of the design and construction progress to date. First, on the workplace strategy, as mentioned in your memo, this was a really detailed look at the operation of the current space and how it's utilized. And the CBR team, they were there from early in the morning to late at night so that they got a good cross-section of all the employees to talk to, and they wanted to hit all the different shifts, which they did. The final report's going to give us a good idea. In fact, it will give us the square footage that we believe this building needs. It'll also give us some efficiencies in space layout. And all this will be forwarded to the architect. They'll use it as a design guide. I did find out this morning that I anticipated this report to be delivered March 25th. It may be the first week of April, but in any case, it will be prior to the next time we meet with you and give you an update, and that's April 10th. So we'll have a real detailed update then. On to the architect selection. I'm pleased that in this room last Friday, we had a pre-proposal meeting. We had 45 consultants show up. So I'm real pleased with the interest in the design community in our project. And the RFQs are due on March 28th. We'll review those. We'll select some firms to interview, and it'll all be based on the criteria in the RFP and the qualifications of the consultants. CBRE will guide that process, but we're in control of it. The contractor selection is the next big item on the list. It's really important to get the contractor on board with the design team as soon as possible. In fact, in the memo, I think I anticipated bringing you a contractor selection recommendation in May. We're going to move that up to April. We're going to get right on that to get the team together and get moving. Something I didn't mention in the memo is site planning. That's really, the architect's going to really help us with that, but CBRE has taken a look at the site layout, and I know we've talked that there's options to vacate a laddie to give us more room. It's not preferable because of the change in the traffic patterns, and we don't know yet, but it looks like our building could fit in the north parking lot, and this is just one option. But that option might be to build a new building in the north parking lot, keeping the existing police headquarters operational the entire time, making one move, demoing the existing building, and building the parking lot or parking structure right there. So we hope that works. It looks good. And at this point, we'll be back April 10th with detailed information about the architect selection and that workplace strategy. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine?
Is there anything in the document that they're doing that you're going to get that you expected on March 25th that's going to be used to make any other determinations in the selection or the design or what they're looking at prior to us meeting again? Like, are they going to come back with this information and people are going to be making a determination on what they're going to do, any of the information that they're given to the contractor or the design people prior to us meeting again? Because I would like to see that recommendation be prior to additional decisions being made that people would be relying on then.
And you will.
Okay. I just wanted to see your timeline.
Correct, yes. The 17th.
Are we going to get a copy of the RFP?
You can sure have it. It's a public document. I'd be happy to provide it.
And I know you said here that it was going to be the third week of May, but now you're expecting you're going to do it in April?
In April. Third week of April is our goal
Third
now
week of April
for
instead?
contractor
Okay.
selection.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Russell?
I just had a question on why the delay from the time you choose the contract selector to the start date. I mean, it's really, is it because of decisions having to be made by council? The reason I'm asking that is we had a really warm winter this year, but we don't always. And so that could delay construction if we wait till November.
Well, we first off, we want to get to construction as quickly as we can. And will we be able to move faster than this? Possibly. but this is CBR's best estimate of how long it will take to design, because we have permitting and all the approvals that have to go, and of course, council needs to approve too, but really, you're not really the reason it's going to be delayed. We're going to schedule all the meetings well in advance. It's the design time.
Okay.
It's getting all the documents. We have to approve the preliminary design and then let them go to final, and it's going to take a number of months.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
We're not having any problems scheduling because they're doing work with the school district, are we?
No, we have a totally separate team. CBRE's team working on this job is separate from the schools.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Keck?
Dave, could you tell them a little bit about the desire to do a design advisory group?
Yes. As we get into this, it was very successful with the schools, and we think we want to do this too, and that's to get a group of, say, 12 to 20 people. I think the schools had 20. They said that might have been a few too many, to help us, as we go through the design process, to have citizens, along with city staff and police officers, and all as a committee to look over the designs in the preliminary stage and make sure we're not missing a big item that the public wants. Part of the public process, and perhaps a city council member or two might want to sit on that too. And I think we'll probably put that together sometime in April, late April.
Excellent. I could see where that kind of needs some heavy lifting to make sure that we get, what we want to get, because right now it is very conceptual, and I love the idea of bringing in community members who could give an idea of what they would value in a facility, as well as some police experts, and I think that's a great opportunity to say, here's what Northglenn sort of ended up with, and maybe that's a point of, hey, what did you like or not like about that as well. Another opportunity to gain some feedback on that. Councilmember Martinez?
I really like the idea of adding a design advisory group. How would that impact our timeline? Do you think it would push it out a little bit more, or do you think it would still be able to be accomplished in our kind of preliminary estimated timeline?
It's in the estimated timeline.
Okay. Cool.
We'll run it concurrently. We did, some of the staff and our consultants did tour Parker Station, and we're going to be making other tours. And then, of course, Northglen's are not built yet, but we want to know what they're planning.
Yep, I think their groundbreaking is next month, and again, just so many similarities with the size of the population they're serving, number of officers, those kind of things. It's just pretty apples to apples. Obviously, they got their financing in place some time ago, so there's obviously a lot of differences, but a lot of similarities that are definitely worth spending some time on, I think. Other questions or comments?
I'd like to. Littleton did theirs just a couple of years ago for their remodel when they didn't have that bond go through, and I took a tour of theirs, and there's only 18,000 square feet. They've got a larger population, and if we could go ahead and take a look at some of the things they did, especially for their storage, for their evidence and stuff. I would like to get a little bit more information on how they picked the design team and exactly what benefits they thought they got out of that. Like, what criteria did they have? I mean, I don't think we want people just coming in just with their hopes and dreams, wishes of what they think. I mean, they must have had some kind of guidelines, criteria for working with the group. So if we could find out what they did and what they felt they benefited from. You said they felt that they had 20 and they felt that was too many.
The schools, well, I don't know if there's too many. It was on the upper end is what CBR thought. You don't want any more than that.
Right. So I'd like to know what the benefits were of it and what the downside of it is and what exactly they're doing it for, what the purpose of doing that, what the outcome is supposed to be. And I mean, and if it's just marketing, then okay. But
Okay.
If it's really for some, outcome goals, some information, I'd like to know what it is that we're looking for from them.
I will find out a little bit more about that. I
All
don't
right.
have the answer to that. I do know, the idea is to get a cross-section of from the public of what they think of the preliminary design.
Mr. Keck may have another
As much as I know
response to
about
that.
it.
Yeah, I think I might be able to answer that question for Councilor Barentine. I actually currently still do serve on the Clayton Elementary Design Advisory Group, and there are 20 plus of us, but preponderance of the people on that design advisory group are actually teachers who actually utilize the school. And then there are citizens also who they've just volunteered, and I just volunteered to help the schools, and Dorothy Hargrove volunteered to help with Charles Hay Elementary School because of its proximity to Bard Park. So as enunciated by the architect, they're using Wold, W-O-L-D, architects to do their design. They just built that process in to try to engage some citizenry. A lot of the heavy lifting in the design aspects were already taken care of, but it was certainly trying to get some input from people who would be impacted by the project. I don't live immediately adjacent to Clayton, but I live close, and was very concerned that the school, myself and another resident who lives at the school pretty much, had input on the impact of changing the site, where the school is and where the bus turnoffs are and the parking lot and the drop-offs. And I think their intent was to try to engage the neighborhood as well as obviously the teachers are those who are going to be impacted with the building itself. So we did a tour of the new school in the Sheridan School District. It's basically a joint elementary and middle school. And I think that's kind of what the design advisory group would do, would maybe take a look at different aspects of how do we design this with the neighborhood in mind, as well as adjacent to Miller Field, which is supposed to be the new festival park for the city, as you recall from the master plan. So I think that's their intent.
I just wanted to see some guidelines on just what he's talking about. If people have brought up that there's a parking thing or something so that we can contain it just a little bit or have some goals on what we want. I'd just like to see some structure to it. Otherwise, it may look to the community that it's just marketing. So I just want to see some structure, or at least some where you want to start points.
Yeah, I think some hopes is for,
categories.
what areas the stakeholders might represent. This many people who are involved in policing,
But
this many
thanks for that
people
insight on
from
it,
this
Eric. I
area.
appreciate that.
Other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'd like to move us on to some scheduling to try to knock that out here. We've got about 30 minutes before our regular session, so I'd like to move us on to agendas setting, looking at future study session topics as well as regular meeting topics. Mr. Keck, would you mind walking us through perhaps, what would that be, March 27th agenda?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So on the 27th of March, Slate Communications, as has been the case the past couple months, comes the last study session of the month. I believe it's their desire to do a couple of things. Number one, discuss again the State of the City address and talk about the dates and how that legislatively will move forward. But also, I believe they want to, Allison can probably answer this, will they be unveiling the magazine and all that at that point in time, what that's going to potentially look like? Yes, so you'll be seeing and feeling the paper, as well as seeing what a cover would look like potentially. The Budget Advisory Committee is going to be visiting you on the 27th. They've been diligently working on putting together a paper that to the City Council indicating their desire to continue moving into the future, and also discuss the value that they believe they'll be bringing to the city, specifically the City Council. South Broadway improvements discussion will be coming forward on the 27th, and this particular discussion item would be both discussion, informational, and directional from Council. What you'll be seeing is a proposal from Public Works and Community Development. They've jointly been working on this. That shows various packages that could move forward with cost for the improvements, as well as future budgetary costs and impacts to maintain those types of improvements, as well as sources of funding. Will be discussed with you as a council next week to determine how you'd like to see the staff move forward with the improvement of the 3400 block. Actually, would be 3300 block for electrical too, because they're tied together right now. Board and commission policy, as we discussed before, we had Krista Gravy work on putting together a board and commission policy that basically wraps up all of the boards and commissions that we currently have. It'll be one source of all information regarding how our boards and commissions are selected, the process, how the council will move forward in the future for making appointments and reappointments, as well as memorialize some thoughts and ideas, such as one resident per board and commission at a time. We put that in this particular policy. I will tell you that it's been an incredible journey for us to try to pull up all of the documents as appendices to the policy itself, but we feel like it would be very beneficial for the council as well as the community to have that in one source. So, in other words, the bylaws, the charter, the ordinances that have formulated these boards and commissions will all be in one location. So that'll be coming forward. The Littleton Inglewood Wastewater Treatment Plant has several code amendments that they want to discuss with council that requires council approval. So they'll be taking about 20 minutes to discuss those. That went to the Water and Sewer Board, I believe, this past Tuesday. And they recommended that comes forward to the City Council for approval. But rather than just put it on an agenda for approval, we felt like the council should be aware of what these code amendments look like. And then you'll have, aside from Slate coming, Allison will be doing her communications update, but we'll also be moving forward with budgeting community goals review, where we'll be starting out looking at high-level revenues and expenditures for general fund and enterprise funds, as well as, if timing permits, we'll jump into the first department to go through the process of pointing out to the council that particular department's budget, as well as the challenges that they see coming, the cost drivers, what's driving the costs, where if they have any revenues or not. This is going to be a template that you'll have and see every department come forward throughout this particular process. But we're going to start with, I believe we're doing community development in the police department to start out. The council wanted to see police first, given the issues brief that was provided to you by the Budget Advisory Committee. Excuse me. Allergies, so that you can see how that would have an impact on the 2018 budget.
Were you planning on having police on the 27th?
I don't think we're going to be able to get there.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it'll be a long night if you do, but it all depends on the questions that emanate from just the discussion at the high level, the 30,000-foot level of our revenues and expenses and what those drivers are.
And road mapping, who we're going to have in.
Exactly. We'll have a complete calendar for you to be able to look at. That will also be discussed on the 27th, that talks about who's going to come and when. And again, we can get some additional cues from council from that study session on whether or not this particular process is still working. We want to hear that feedback as well and make it so that it's interactive and get some direction from you that helps with ground rules for the formulation of the 2018 fiscal year budget. So moving on then from there, if there are no questions on the 27th.
Well,
Yep, there are.
I think it was a good idea. I appreciate your bringing the wastewater treatment plant issues forward to a study session, because all of since the charter requires the mayor and two council people to sit there and the mayor and two council people were not present there, then it's probably, I appreciate that you're doing it that way, because it won't have even been heard, and I assume there was a reason they wanted that in the charter. So thank you for doing that. I also want to make sure that the Tri-Cities meeting and the sewer plant, the agreement to go ahead and have additional meetings, because we were also made it pretty clear at that meeting, both councils, that they wanted some joint presentations on these expenditures that were coming through. So how are we going to time that out and get that to happen at a joint meeting?
Any update on Tri-City, perhaps? Nothing really.
On Tri-Cities, Sheridan will be the one that's hosting this, and their city manager, Devin Granberry, is supposedly working on an agenda as well as a selection of a date for the Tri-Cities meeting, and I have not heard back from him yet as to when that would be, but it will be in the very near future. That's the Three Cities meeting, obviously. As far as the wastewater treatment plant,
back to just for the Tri-Cities meeting.
Yeah.
At another meeting I went to, I would like to have some discussion about some things that need to happen about, that was listening to the Littleton meeting about the group that's doing the corridor.
Santa Fe.
Down for Santa Fe, and to see where they're at, the Platte River Working Group, where they're at, to get some kind of report from them prior to that meeting, along with that corridor study and what they're doing as far as where they're coming up. I think they're meeting with CDOT. I think it runs from Denver all the way to C470.
Yes.
And then also some discussion on the kind of how our comp plans are affecting us kind of thing. So if we could have each individual city, because if we're going to get together and do a corridor study, we have to know what each of us are going to be putting into the system, both for density and traffic, and what who's going to pay for what if we shove more than the other guy or whatever. I mean, Littleton has impact fees. We haven't done that yet, and so I also want to kind of bring that piece up too. But if we can have some kind of discussion about some things that we might want to have at that meeting. I know Littleton is very interested in a lot of issues, especially now that the Ensor property is getting a development, and that may impact our McClellan Reservoir too. And I have some concerns about that, and have attended some of those meetings as well, because that's a lot of humanity going in. So we all need to get together on some of this stuff. So if maybe you could talk to those city managers and see if we could, and what kind of reports we need from other entities that are along that area that could impact us or give us some information on what they're doing.
I got a question. Is that what we all want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think those were already kind of, those two specific topics, I think were already kind of envisioned as sort of front and center for Tri-City with the Santa Fe Corridor,
Actually,
the River Corridor Working Group.
Right.
And, I think that, providing any additional potential agenda items would be helpful. If individual members, I'm going to suggest, have ideas for agenda topics, that they send them to Eric, and that an agenda get disseminated to all three cities maybe 2 weeks prior. That way each of us can decide whether we accept that agenda and whether we want to modify them.
Because it was a big change from, let's have Diana DeGette, because I don't think we have a lot to talk about. And I was like, yeah, we do.
Yeah,
and so
again,
there was
I've
a
heard
big
about both those
turnaround
topics
from that.
From both, I don't know if it was Littleton or Sheridan, but I have had some conversations with them about, hey, we need to kind of get together on what we're doing there. If anybody feels like those are inappropriate topics, feel free to chime in. But I think those two were kind of envisioned as talking points for this agenda. And if anybody has anything else, feel free to email Eric with them.
Okay, mine goes back to the budget process. And actually what I'm thinking is going back to the basics, and maybe this would be incorporated earlier rather than later, about what are the things that we actually need as a city. And then all of those other things, if we have the resources, fine, but I think we need to get the basics of what we have to have first. So
We've got that information relatively handy, right, as far as what are the statutorily required expenditures. And then I think council can probably take it from there and say, well, of the optional, we view, police spending at this level as absolutely mandatory and those kind of things. I think, what Councilmember Russell perhaps is looking for is more of a zero-based budgeting approach, and starting her from maybe that point and saying, here's where the absolute minimums are, and here's what percentage of the budget is able to be changed.
right, and I mean it goes back to maybe once we get those, I mean, I think planning and zoning is supposed to provide capital improvements, but have we really been whittling away at that $200 million capital improvement list?
I think we're due for a little bit of an update on where we are on capital expenditures. And I think Broadway, honestly, is going to be a great segue next week. Because we're going to be looking at some of those long-term improvements and funding sources and say, okay, here's what we budgeted for. Here's maybe some of the uses of the funds, certainly for Broadway, but that might lead to a conversation about, well, do we want to do a signage here or do we want to do signage there? Kind of a conversation that it may sort of lead to. But
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, if we could, I guess I didn't make it clear, if we could just add them on here too, like those extra meetings like the Tri-City or the wastewater treatment plant, so that we remember that we might want to do certain issues prior to those meetings and just keep ourselves aware of them if we could.
Yeah, I think that'd be good practice if we just add any joint meetings that we know that we've scheduled onto this tentative study session topic list. Any further discussion on the 27th? It's a little bit packed. Going through the timing or thinking about, the topics, I imagine that slates shouldn't be too robust of a conversation. I think that's probably a 20 to 30 minute maybe. Budget advisory, I envisioned not super robust either. I'm envisioning about a 15-minute sort of discussion. Broadway improvement could be a little more robust. 45 minutes to an hour is kind of my guess. Board and commission policy discussion. Having not seen what you guys are going to propose, that could be a very brief discussion or it could be a very long discussion. So that one is kind of a wild card in my mind. I don't anticipate the code amendments going too long. Any idea on how long that might
15
run?
to 20 minutes. I
The
mean,
meeting didn't go that long, so if you take
Yeah.
it by the meeting,
it
Yeah, it shouldn't be a
attended the
very-
meeting. It was 15 minutes at most.
or
Shouldn't
at
be a
least the
ton of
executive
discussion.
session. I didn't hear the executive session. I should correct that. I was not listening to the executive
I
session.
wasn't in that either, but it's
So-
15 minutes on the codes.
Yeah.
PIO should be about 10 minutes, and then budgeting for community goals, I think, will kind of take us through to the 9 o'clock hour. My thought is that if you'll put that as the last item, we can kind of decide how deep into that item we want to go.
The budget?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Then I'll move us on to April 3rd, unless there's any further discussion on that agenda item. I'll move us on to April 3rd. This is our 2015 International Code discussion prior to the regular meeting. We've got an hour there. Do you anticipate that taking up the full hour?
I do, in as much that believe there'll be several questions from the amendments that may or may not come along. Staff is meeting with Denver Fire this Thursday to discuss more specifically the International Fire Code and the amendments that Denver adopted. I think that this council or some council members have enunciated a kind of an allergic reaction to some of those amendments, and I would agree. Looking at some, I don't believe they're necessary, but we want to make sure that as we move forward that we are in coordination with how that operates. But yeah, that should take an hour, because aside from the International Fire Code, we have the International Residential Code, International Electrical Code as well, to tell you here's what was in the old code, here's what's being proposed in the new code, and whether or not council wants to make a deviation, which you certainly have the right and ability to do so, to remove certain sections and give some direction to the staff on how you'd like to see that come forward, which would need to be adopted formally at a council meeting in the future.
I think if you could highlight what you think, staff might recommend against adopting, as well as a list that
Sure.
council has previously rejected from previous code updates, like in the
Sprinklers
13
in all homes.
international, the sprinkler, I remember
Yeah.
being an issue for us, and we
Yeah.
had to come back and readdress that issue and actually remove that portion from our code. And so, I think if we're a little more conscious about that on the front end and identifying those issues, I think we can have a little more robust conversation during that hour and try to identify that, slice it right the first time. Because this time we also have Denver kind of involvement, and so
Yep.
we may have to figure out what's an allergic reaction for them as well.
Yep.
And perhaps that makes that list as well.
We'll have that this Thursday.
Great, thank you. Other comments or questions regarding April 3rd? Okay, moving on to the regular meeting. Any highlights from the, I know we'll probably have to go over that next week a little more in depth.
It's going to be a longer meeting in that there are several things that are coming back to the City Council. Specifically, I think that night you'll have perhaps, again, the McClellan Reservoir Foundation recommendation for an agreement potentially with the brokerage firm. Beyond that, it's just a loaded agenda. I can't even
I know we've got the exec session with outside
recall.
counsel, I think scheduled is that meeting? 17, thank you. Okay, so no exec session then, maybe.
Maybe not.
Councilmember Russell?
Sorry.
When is it coming forward for the EMER? The 17th or the 3rd?
The 10th.
Thinking the 3rd, I think I just heard. Yeah.
So
Have
at
we
some
heard
point before then, can we talk about the land and what we're going to do with it, whether we want to do long-term leases or whether we want to sell it? Because I think if we could come to that conclusion before we hire them, then we can give the broker direction as to where we want to go.
Okay. So your preference would then be to have a study session again before, just amongst council before then, so we could, we can push that to the 17th, that's fine, the brokerage agreement, but yeah, we would need that direction from council if there's consensus to say, hey, it's either all all leases only, or lease with the potential for a sale at the end of 20 years. That's the kind of direction we would need.
If you don't mind, my suggestion would be to pick that issue up when we approve the contract and have that discussion about what type of direction. Once we have the details of the final contract, then we can say, here's the direction we have for this. And I think part of that can be we only want to entertain leases, or we only want to entertain sales, or we'll entertain both and give them a little bit of direction. So that would be my preference. You think a separate study session is required?
I don't necessarily think a separate study session is required, but I do think we have to have a conversation.
And I think it would be helpful for us to come to some consensus so that this new person who represents us has an idea about how we feel about some of those issues. So I agree.
I mean, will it, as far as the contract itself, does it matter whether we're going to lease it? I mean, when they come forward with this contract, will they have already had something in mind?
You know, the terms, may not change, and if that's the case, then it probably wouldn't matter because we've seen those terms, but the terms may change, based on our conversation from last time. So that's the only reason I was suggesting that, that term, may help us in making that decision as well, but it probably won't impact most of our decision making, but that's just speculation. So, just a thought that, again, I think we can pick this up during that time and come to some consensus on that. Again, I'm pretty clear. I think my preference is certainly long-term leases. I'm open to hearing a sale, but I would want to give the direction that I'd rather be under market on a lease than over market on a sale, and I think that hopefully speaks volumes to them. But if you want something more substantial in direction on that, I think that, now's the time to say, hey, we need something more substantial than something like that direction before we consider the contract.
Actually, I agree with you, and so I don't know what other people think.
Maybe we can get consensus on this right now. Councilmember Barentine.
Well, when you said the contract, you're talking about the contract for the person that's going to be the broker.
Correct.
And when they were here before, they said it does matter in the level of expertise they have and what they're doing, and we do need to make a clear decision about what we're willing to do. I was just out and went around that area this weekend, and there's not a lack of activity around there. And especially now that the hospital's going up on the other one, and the feedback that I got that we could have got double what we had, and Shea made a lot of money on that. So this is an asset of the company. That was terrible. That's an asset of the people, the citizens of this community, and it's been held on for a long time. And there's been some concerns that have surfaced from our last conversation when people went back and looked at that ballot issue, that it was not clear. And when you have a ballot issue that requires that you read additional information to truly be clear that this was going to be encompassing on all the properties, and that wasn't included in the actual ballot issue that was voted on, I can see where people get a little concerned that it looked a little iffy on what they were voting on, because they truly believe they were voting on one parcel of land. So I do think that we need to come to an agreement on whether we're selling it or whether we're not.
Do you have a preference? Do you have direction that you would like to
I don't want
give?
to sell it. I don't want to
So you
sell
don't
it.
even want to entertain offers
I mean,
for purchase?
we can entertain an offer to sell at any time we want and put it
So
out
did
for
you
a
like
vote.
the way I stated it?
I am neither criticizing nor agreeing with the way that you stated it. I'm trying to clarify it since you seem to have to question it. So I'm trying to clarify it. We always have the option to sell it and bring it to the people and let them vote on it. So at this point, I'd like to look at I'm perceiving that ballot issue as that the people believe they were only voting on one parcel of land, and that the only option that we have right now is to lease, unless we decide we want to go ahead and put it out there. So right now my preference is a lease, with the explanation if that clarified it.
But you're willing to entertain offers for sale? Yes or no?
Only if we're going to let people vote on selling the land.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Jones.
I thought I made them.
No, that was clarifying. Thank you.
Thanks.
I agree with Ms. Barentine on that issue. In fact, I had a long talk with Mr. Flaherty after that. I'm like, wait a minute, you said, I think council, and maybe you didn't, but I did, and I think Bob did as well, and we had a discussion that we thought it was just for that one property. I don't think the intent was ever to make everything sellable in 20 years. Just that one property. And that's how the ballot kind of read as well. So I'm with Councilmember Barentine. I just want to see at least if somebody wants to offer us $100 million for a small part, maybe we can reconsider that at a different time. I'm not totally close to it, but it's a long-term asset of the city, and I'd like to see it a long-term asset down the future. I also like to have a discussion eventually on, does that money go back to the later fund, and will the later fund ever look for new investments to build our community out? We've missed great opportunity hoarding that money, doing absolutely nothing with it when the market was down. We could have bought more land, done more things. One of the pleasures of being on the Arapahoe County Budget Board is seeing what they do, how they purchase stuff, and it's for their long term, and they're, and I think we need to look at that as well. Not just, are we going to lease? I would prefer that we not. But what do we do with the money? What do we do with the $2.4 million-ish in that account that's sitting there doing zero, not gaining interest, not doing anything? And it's not, the longer it's in there, the less it's going to be worth down the road. So I hope that we can, as a council, look at some opportunities and maybe have some presented to us by our realtor. Say, hey, there's an opportunity here. Do you guys want to look at that? And maybe we can be forwards looking, just like our previous, council members back in the day were for us. So that's what I'd like to do. Thank you. That's
Can I ask,
Thank
are
you.
you wanting to put that on the budget then? Are you wanting to include that in the budget discussion?
No, it's not it's a separate discussion about that fund. But I've been wanting to have this discussion forever. So I think, Joe, when Jill was on, she kind of hoarded it and held on to it, and I wanted to hold on to it, but I wanted to hold on to it for a different reason. And so I pray and hope that we can come to a good conclusion, discussion. What are we going to do with this? So that's where I'm at.
Well, keep in mind now that I just want to interject this real quick before we continue the conversation. That the later fund is now being calculated into our reserves, and that if we were to move later, we'd have to reevaluate our reserve levels. Councilmember Yates.
When it comes to Cleveland, my preference is leasing versus selling. Here again, unless it is quite an offer, I'd prefer to see the long-term asset for the city. So,
I think we have consensus on this issue that we want to lease this land, and that we'll hear and entertain an offer for a sale, but it better be super strong. And then I think this separate issue of whether or not the voters need to vote on is a separate issue. My understanding is actually respectfully different than the Mayor Pro Tem's in that, I think the intention of council was to allow a future sale at the discretion of a future council, and I think we even discussed that very issue. And so, perhaps we can leave that issue, though, for another day, because I don't think we've got enough time to come to some consensus on that. But I think we've got consensus around we want to lease. We'll entertain an offer to buy, but it better be way above market.
Could we add that to the? Could we at least put it somewhere in the queue that it get discussed? Because it may have been council's intention, but it doesn't appear to have been the voters' intention. So I would like to have that discussion, and if we could put it on the list to discuss the later fund, like Councilmember Gillett said, I'd appreciate that too.
Mr. Comer, is there a council action that could clarify that issue for future councils that would be binding? I guess my concern is that, with it being an initiative that was passed by the voters, that we may not have authority to amend the language there.
If it was passed by the voters, you cannot amend it. It has to be amended by the voters only.
And so, but could we add clarity, or no? The only clarity would come from the voters? I guess
the
I'm just
clarity
curious.
I'd have to look into that issue, but I would hazard a guess that the voters, you'd have to put something before the voters to clarify
to get
it.
that clarity. But I think that if this council or a future council makes a determination they want to go for a vote, certainly that's pretty clear, and we can make that determination. However, in the opposite, I could envision an issue with that. So I agree. If we could get some clarity on that, that'd be great. Maybe this is best handled for now as a council request. To get some information about how to handle that issue and whether or not we have any authority to attack that issue, or what would be needed to gain that level of clarity.
And if we could just include, I've talked to some people who've done ballot issues and kind of the legislative piece of this, and the fact that what was presented to the voters, and that was different in what was where they were said, go read Council Bill 28, is where the discrepancy is coming in on whether that was really valid or not. That what the actual ballot issue said is what they voted on, and not the extra wording that came along with it that gave all that extra authority. So if we could get some
I think we understand
expertise
the
on that,
issue.
I'd appreciate that.
I think we understand the issue. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just wanted to real quickly ask about a joint study session or joint meeting with the school board again. Are we ready for that? We're starting to, can we contact them again and try to get this on the agenda here?
And Mayor, I just did talk with Superintendent Rubin last Thursday evening after the Design Advisory Group meeting and mentioned that to her. They do want to have a joint meeting, I think, to also discuss some property that they may wish to dispose of and maybe work with us on that. So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
I'd like to get that scheduled sooner rather than later. This was a goal of ours to strengthen relations with them, and we still have yet to get back with them since our first date meeting over at Calore. So I think now is a great time for a follow-up, particularly with everything we're doing with communications and with their exciting project and our exciting project. It's a great time to touch base. So I'd love to get that scheduled sooner rather than later before we head into the fourth quarter of our collective term here. Other questions or comments regarding scheduling? Seeing none, I'll adjourn this meeting. We'll pick back up at 7 next door.
Just the Chaffa thing, it's on the list.
Yeah.
And I saw the one that was presented to Littleton, and I think it was eye-opening on what they're doing.